the AI from an investment perspective panel. Today we have Bill, Paul, and Gayatri. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
It's Gayatri, but you can call me G as well if that's easier.
Yeah. And she very well renowned VCs and then actually, especially in the AI space in an early stage VC ecosystem. I'd love to let them actually speak about themselves and introduce themselves. And quick intro about who I am, Cleta Martiro. I'm an investor at Glasswing Ventures, who investing in AI early stage startups in the Northeast and broader now ecosystem in the US. Let's start with Bill.
Thank you, Cleta. Delighted and honored to be here, and thanks for inviting me back to Lena and the team. My name is Bill Reichert, and I'm a partner here at Pegasus Tech Ventures. Pegasus is a global venture capital firm investing across the world in all different technologies, with a fairly significant portfolio of companies in the AI space. I've been an investor for many years now, but I started as an entrepreneur, and and I am embarrassed to admit that I've been involved in AI since the 80s, which gives me a perspective on AI that is a little bit different than some people. So I'll be talking about that shortly.
Wonderful, welcome, Paul.
Yeah. I didn't touch a neural net until the 90s, so I can't touch Bill, but anyway, I'm Paul Willard. I'm with GREP VC. We're an early stage robotics as a service venture capital fund. All of the robots have some level of intelligence, varying company by company, but yeah, RAS is the new SaaS, I like to say, or SaaS on wheels, I like to call them.
Welcome. G?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you guys. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me again. I'm with Micron Ventures, the corporate venture arm of Micron Technology. Late 2018, we announced a $100 million AI fund. And we've been investing in basically AI applied in various verticals like manufacturing, automotive, healthcare. We call a vertical Better Planet, and we do sustainability, ag tech type investments as well. And then we also invest in deep tech domains. We've invested our fund 1, and now we are actively investing out of fund 2 that was approved last year. So very excited to be here. Personally, I have a mixed background. I've done everything from product management, product marketing, strategy, M&A. I also worked for an institutional venture firm in Germany 10 years ago, and now I'm doing corporate venture. And my earliest exposure to AI and neural networks was basically similar to Paul in the 90s. That was my undergrad thesis, was on neural networks and fuzzy logic. Didn't realize it was going to come back in vogue. So excited to be here. Thanks.
Wonderful. And it's a great segue to my first question, which is how has the definition of AI changed over the last few decades, and the last few years for sure has been way more buzzwordy and prominent, but how has it changed over the course of the years?
I'll just, I'll jump in from apparently the most distant perspective, I guess. So for what it's worth, yeah, no, it has evolved and diversified, like any ecosystem. It started out as more or less figuring out how to create a cascade of rules that would enable a machine to pretend to be, intelligent in sort of making decisions, to, neural networks evolving and eventually convolutional neural networks. And then you had this parallel path of natural language processing or natural language understanding and blah, blah. So you had this ecosystem evolution of machines being able to do things that we associated with the human brain historically. And as time goes on, nobody thinks any rules-based system is AI anymore. Back in the days, we thought it was, but and now, that's just sort of course, that's what computers can do. And so AI is sort of constantly pushing the envelope of trying to demonstrate that it can do more and more very difficult things that we've been imagining forever and ever that it could do. But it doesn't really matter how we define AI, because what really matters is what technology can deliver that is compelling as a value proposition or benefit in some way that makes it, from a venture capital point of view, an investable company. So I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about the definition, but happy to share with my colleagues here in terms of their perspective. Paul?
No, I feel the same way. I'm like, I never even think about the definition. I think about the applications and what's achievable today and commercializable today.
I'm on a similar boat. I think the only thing that I would probably add is, as I mentioned, when I did my undergrad on neural net, it was actually facial recognition, right? But in the back of everyone's mind, I think, at least for non-practitioners, AI basically meant artificial general intelligence, like the robotics, but smarter, that kind of but I think now the perception has definitely changed. You realize that AI is more inherent in pretty much everything, right? So in fact, one of the debates we're having right now, we've not officially announced our fund to, should we even call it an AI fund? Does it even make sense anymore? Because everyone has some element of AI, right? Of course, we don't consider rule-based operations as AI as well. So that's, I call that AI wash. Just like back in the day, you had cloud wash. You just do a subscription business model and then call it cloud. And I'm like, no, the technology that's different. You have to have the technical capabilities, right? So we do look at it from that lens, but I think fundamentally AI is now one of the tool in your tool chain, right? That's kind of how I'm starting to look at it.
Mm-hmm. What are some AI or applications, let's go with that, trends or applications that get each of you excited today?
I'm going to jump in because I feel so strongly about robotics as a service. Don't think of it as a vertical. Think of it as a horizontal, like SaaS, that's maybe applying to a slightly different space. SaaS was great for knowledge-based work. RAS can do other things too. So RAS can interact with the physical world. And I think it's the combination of AI on the software side and on the hardware side, the same lithium-ion batteries that made our laptops go, the peacetime benefits of the mobile phone wars and all the great sensors that we get very inexpensively from these things, and some really nice motors that I think Tesla started with, but they're now broadly available for many applications. And you can mix AI and those three pieces of hardware, three elements of hardware, and you can make all kinds of applications. And we're just starting to see the beginning of it, but it's hitting a lot of verticals.
Yeah, and I'll pile on, and back to our original sort of framework that it's about the application, not about the definition or even the algorithms per se. But yeah, we are heavy investors already in robotics as a service. We're investors in Vicarious and in Osaro. And we're also investors in SpaceX, which at some level you could call robotics as a service, which is Paul's point that it's the intersection of AI and hardware and the physical world is a broad base. It's not just the things that look like what's in the background of Paul's frame there. So we're also investors in in companies outside of the U.S. Or investor in a really interesting company in Japan that is doing robotics as well, using a entirely different version of AI. But and beyond that, just purely on the software side, the funny acronym RPA, robotic process automation. Maybe one of you guys knows who came up with that, because it is just bizarrely confusing to the layperson. And in any case, but I'm a huge fan of that category of just automating human tasks using intelligence. We were investors in a company called Element AI, which was bought, which was purchased. But the idea of integrating AI into human knowledge work and having human in the loop, I think that's still a rich area. So we don't have to think of AI and automation or RPA or even RAS as eliminating humans. They can certainly facilitate humans or extend humans in a whole bunch of ways, which is what computers have done and machines and technology have done for ever and ever and ever. So that was a very long way of saying pretty much everything is exciting.
I love the response of the panelists. So I don't know how much I can add, but I'll say that as a kid, I was very much into biology, but I knew that I never wanted to be a doctor. I didn't like the sight of blood and so on. So to me, this intersection of AI and healthcare is truly fascinating. I mean, I think there's so much that can be done to sort of Bill's point about it's not about eliminating the human. There are certain things that machines are better at, repetitive tasks, processing large volumes of data, whereas I think humans are way better in other things. So that complementary functionality where we can leverage the machines or AI for certain use cases and then overlay human intelligence on top of that, I think is vastly sort of I think was underrated, because there's always this talk of replacing humans, but I think the point is no one wants to sit there and do a repetitive task over and over again, right? So if you can free up the human mind to actually do something that's much more interesting, I think it's really cool. And I think in the healthcare and life sciences space, there's so much that's possible. So I'm kind of personally passionate about that space, but agree with both Paul and and Bill that the use cases are so broad and the application areas are so broad that it's fascinating. We've done robotics. You think about, to Paul's point, I mean, it's any an autonomous tractor is a robot, a SpaceX flight is a robot. So, I mean, I was talking to another company which is doing robotics about a robot that goes and helps nurses in hospitals, right? Just allowing them to care for the patient as opposed to, walking around and picking up stuff. And so I think that's kind of where I feel like the value add is so tremendous and the potential is so huge.
Is there anything within AI applications that's overhyped today, or areas when it comes to investing that you would avoid?
Okay, G, you got to go now. Okay, given that reaction, okay, you go.
It's not necessarily overhyped. It's there are a lot of AI acceleration. There's coming from infrastructure or hardware side, I'd say that I'm hearing a lot of acceleration companies, right? Because everyone's trying to take market share away from CPUs. Can I, offload AI machine learning workloads to GPUs? But now GPU, there's a behemoth there. So now how can I capture that market? Oh, can I offload it to the network side? Now I have DPUs and IPUs and all of those. And then can I have specific AI accelerators? And so there's the accelerators abound. So now I just want to, I've heard of a lot of them. So now I'm curious to see how well entrenched they're going to become. So that's kind of my my response to that one.
Yeah, I'll pick one of several other possible categories of overhyped, right? Which is maybe a little more controversial, but which is autonomous vehicles. You know, I mean, we got way out over our skis on, you know, on level 5 autonomy or whatever people thought was going to happen. And so it's, you know, it's at some, you know, it's some, and everybody's now back down to kind of, well, no, it's ADAS, right? It's, you know, advanced driver assistance, right? We're not, you know, necessarily going to have purely autonomous vehicles, but anytime soon. So, you know, that was, you know, how much damage did we do there? I don't know. I think, you know, like when the internet got overhyped, it resulted in, you know, billions of dollars being spent driving and pushing and collecting data and modeling, and you know, that wound up being a public good at some level. That we you know, God bless all the VCs who blew all that money, but it was, and you know, and I guess in particular Google may have blown as much money as everybody else. I'm not sure. We'll see how that, I'm not sure if anybody's done the accounting on that. But no, but it is, yeah, I mean, there's value there. It's not like it's, you know, it's not like, I don't know, pet rocks or anything like that. I mean, it's real. There's going to be, you know, just, you know, the classic Gartner hype curve, just as the internet went through the hype curve, you know, so have autonomous vehicles and a few other categories in, you know, in the AI space.
Yeah, I was similar to Bill. I was gonna start with the broad statement. Anything that's just too hard to do in the next, like, say, when do you need your Series C by? I would classify as overhyped, and I think autonomous vehicles definitely went through one. We did recently invest in one, Wave AI. A little bit different approach. Started much later than all the rest, so maybe the time horizon will work. We'll see. And then autonomous VTOL air taxis. That's just biting off too much. Yeah. Autonomous electric VTOL air taxis. That's just biting off too much.
Right. You have, I don't know. Yeah, I guess they have. Yeah, obviously they have. There's an AI component there, but that's not the core component. But yeah, I agree. The excitement around these eVTOLs is a little concerning. But
awesome. Moving on a little bit more on the investing side purely, COVID has changed so many aspects of everyone's lives. How has COVID changed the way you assess companies when it comes to investing? Now we've all done, I mean, virtual is, we're used to virtual now. Some companies, VCs have moved to purely virtual. How has that taken, what kind of form or shape has that taken today for you? And whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, God bless COVID, I'll tell you. It was, it's been, I mean, I mean, that's a horrible thing to say, but it's, you know, sort of the sort of first order effect of COVID obviously was we all went, you know, working from home, and Zoom became a unicorn, right? And so that was the first order effect. The second order effect was the market crashed, and then it bounced back. The third order effect was there was a flood of money that came into innovation, an unbelievable flood of money that came in into the venture ecosystem. You know, sort of the good news, bad news is that it has made, you know, it has just made, you know, an incredible number of new funds and new startups and new technologies. So there's a, you know, just an explosion of innovation that is this sort of second order effect of COVID that has happened. You know, sort of, and then in terms of the way we do business, we couldn't do business the old-fashioned way anymore. Just things are too, you know, things are moving too fast, and so we can't afford to get in the car and go up to San Francisco, you know, I mean, anymore. That's just too much time out of our day, much less fly across the country, much less fly across the world. And so, you know, God bless, we can now, I get up in the morning, I talk to Israel, And, before I go to bed at night, I'm talking to Taiwan. And it's like, I can get so much more done now than I could in the old days, thanks to COVID. So, I think, I hate that framing, but it's, it's been a surprising impact in that regard.
I'll say the biggest change for me is that first meetings are on Zoom, right? I mean, first pitch is on Zoom now, and that didn't used to be the way it is. It's more efficient for both us and the entrepreneurs. So net, I think that's probably a win. In robotics as a service, you still have to get a team of the world's best mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, software, AI, working together on a physical product. So you don't see 100% remote teams in robotics as a service world, and they tend to concentrate geographically into cities, not just Silicon Valley, but a handful of cities where you can get the world's best talent in good quantity in each of those sectors at the same time. So it's not likely to be, the Cherokee Reservation in Oklahoma where I come from, right? As much as I want it to be, but there are the typical suspects have concentration. But so at any rate, it's changed less for me following that first meeting.
Quite sorry, I think my IT decided that it was time to reboot and install stuff on my computer. So I think I missed the question. I'm assuming, how has COVID changed investing or?
Investing in general, from the Zoom, any advantages, disadvantages that you've seen from moving from that in-person world to what's now Zoom?
So no, to the points that Bill and Paul made earlier, a lot of first meetings have definitely become Zoom, right? I think historically there was this view that VCs invest in their backyard, right? Like in your region. As a CVC, we have a global footprint. We invest in US, Europe, Israel. We're also investing in Asia. So I think I used to, pre-COVID, fly to Israel and Europe like once a quarter just to like set up a slew of meetings and meet companies. Now it's become sort of moot. I mean, I would still like to meet them in person, but I can still get a lot done now over Zoom. To be honest, it did take some time because we always think of this as a people business. We do want to meet our entrepreneurs that we invest in and so on. But I think one of the very first deals I did post-COVID, everything happened. The team was pretty local. I mean, I'm based in Palo Alto. The team was in Mountain View, but I never met them until a year after we invested. So that was kind of it took a little mental adjustment more than anything else. But I think it has definitely become more effective. The question that I ask myself is, has it become too effective, where you're slamming your schedule with so many meetings that the switching time between like going from listening to a robotics as a service pitch to like a ag tech pitch or something else, there's how much mental bandwidth and how much true intent are you able to put in, right? Because Zoom also facilitates multitasking, which I'm not a big fan of, but which in an in-person meeting you can't do. You're sitting and listening to the pitch. So I think that's the downside. I at least make a conscious effort of not putting in some buffers. So when I am in a pitch meeting, I'm actually giving my time to the entrepreneur as opposed to trying to do something else on the side.
Yeah, I hate VCs that are on their phones during Zoom, and you can tell, they think you can't tell. Come on. Okay, Paul, stop it. Just kidding. I'm kidding.
I heard too many stories of VCs on their phone at in-person meetings back when too, and
I know
it's awful on either.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. So.
Go ahead, Bill.
No. I was just going to say, sort of following on what she's saying, that because it's been easier to do this, I think more money has come into the system, and I think it's punched up prices. I think, the crazy outcome of COVID is it's just driven prices up almost, crazily. I don't, it's, if you've been around venture capital for any amount of time and you look at the pricing these days, you got to think this is not sustainable. For up until recently, we didn't see a lot of cracks in the system. Now we're starting to see some cracks in the system. We'll see how this all plays out, whether or not the chickens come home to roost. But we did the first investment we'd ever done without meeting entrepreneurs was an investment in a company in India, which we would never have done pre-COVID, because we never would have been able to make it happen. But, we actually, we had met these guys before COVID via Zoom, and we thought somehow we'd figure this out in terms of a site visit. COVID happens, we said, screw it. We invested in them, and it's been an unbelievable rocket ship. So thanks to COVID, it's dramatically, accelerated our returns. So, I mean, it's just I don't know. It's crazy. But we'll see. It ain't over until, the check clears, right?
There are signals that things are going kind of almost back to normal. I don't know what normal is at this point, but numbers. But now the geography lines are blurred when it comes to COVID or investing in general. Have you guys seen concentrations when it comes to where startups are or teams are coming from with that AI perspective, or AI early stage startups? Is it still the Silicon Valley in the West Coast and maybe New York, and for healthcare Boston in the West Coast, in the East Coast, or are there other hubs, if I could call them, today?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely blurring. I mean, there's no question that everything is blurring in that regard, because, not only are the companies sort of starting in a broader range of geographies, but the people you're talking to who are part of the founding team, they're in an even broader range, right? Because this guy's in London and this other guy is in Tel Aviv, and this third person is in Switzerland, and the company's registered in Delaware. So I mean, everything's blurring now, I think, in terms of where people are, except in Paul's case, where you gotta have a certain critical mass of people who are bolting and screwing and soldering and whatever, in order to get things built. But I think this is the best. I mean, I think it's been great for innovation. So, the other thing that happened pre-COVID that happened anyway is that AI has totally diffused around the world. And so, we have high school students in Romania who are doing, AI projects, right? And so, wow, I mean, why, so now, there is some bleeding edge AI work, and that's limited to a few pockets. But AI is accessible to, at some level, to pretty much every high school student on the planet at this point. And so that makes a difference as well. And that was G's earlier point, that AI is, sort of now a part of pretty much every application, pretty much, every company now, because it's so widely accessible, and the lines have blurred in terms of access to that, and access to that skill set. Paul, any?
Sorry, I was speaking on mute, I think. I'll second Bill's comment, right? I'll add on a note of a personal anecdote. So my husband is a startup founder, and he started his company in late 2017, early 2018. And his team was always, like, he didn't have a physical presence. Even then, he had his development team in India. He had his head of engineering in New York. He had someone in LA. There was someone in New Zealand. And I thought it was crazy. I was like, don't you guys feel like you need to, come together and build this culture. And he's like, no, this is our culture. And we'll get together once a quarter to do things together. And in retrospect, I was like, wow. So when COVID happened, there was like no disruption for him because he didn't have an office in the first place. It was more disturbing for me, I think, the fact that he was having 6 a.m. calls with the team in India and like waking me up in the process. But for him, it was seamless. So I think I'm seeing a version of that, right? And it depends on the product, and if it's a hardware product, there is a level of need to collaborate, be in person. But if it's a software product, it doesn't really matter. Then the real focus is, how are you building on your company culture? I mean, it needs to be intentional, right? That's kind of what I think about. It's great, but then how are you building that cohesion? You hear a lot about hiring being an issue these days. So especially if you're not seeing people face to face, if you don't have that connective tissue, how are you building the culture, and how are you creating that affiliation to your company and your brand, right?
I'm glad you guys answered this one. I already talked about how I do still have concentrations.
Right.
Wonderful. I think we're past time. I know there was a question in the chat. So could you call the worldwide AI disbursement anthropic intelligence?
I think Bobbin was, being, clever. I don't think there's a need to really address it. I thought, I was thinking centrifugal intelligence might be another term for it, which is, a little bit more directional and purposeful, but maybe anthropic, which is a little more random, is an equally valid word. But I think of it, again, as the way ecosystems evolve. Ecosystems evolve, they spread, they diffuse, they differentiate. And that's, I think, what has happened in AI and in venture and in entrepreneurship and in innovation globally, over the last 20 plus years. So with that, we're being kicked off stage?